Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the Joint Learning Initiative's reading group on religion, humanitarianism, and development. So this week we're very happy to be joined by Christine Schliesser, who's a senior lecturer for systematic theology and ethics at Zurich University and director of studies at the Center for Faith and Society at Freiburg University. Both in Switzerland. She's also a research fellow at Stellenbosch University, South Africa, and co-editor of the interreligious book series Religion Matters, on the significance of religion for global issues, published by Routledge. Christine's going to speak and introduce her new book for 20 or so minutes, and then Dr. Azza Karam will respond for 10-ish minutes before we go into a Q&A. So Dr. Azza Karam is President and CEO of the Women's Learning Partnership and member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on multilateralism. So I will hand over to you, Christine, and then we will directly hand over to Azza before opening up for the Q&A. So Christine, over to you.
Thanks very much, Olivia, for this kind introduction and for organizing this event. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It is such a pleasure to be there with you today. I highly value the Joint Learning Initiative's unwavering commitment to multi-faith dialogue and multi-faith engagement. The recent eruption of violence in the Near East, Azza, you just came back, basically, that still shocks us, shows the urgency of exactly this, that is, of different faith actors and faith communities working together for overcoming hatred, violence, and injustice. And this is also exactly what is at the core of the interreligious book series, Religion Matters, on the significance of religion for global issues, and of the volume that we present here today on the significance. Oh, it's all blurry. Let's see if it comes clear. No, not really. Well, you can look it up online. So the volume, so at least to read out the blurry title, The Significance of Religion for the SDGs, an introduction. I'm also tremendously grateful that one of the persons on this planet who embodies this interfaith commitment in the highest manner possible has agreed to join me today, Dr. Azza Karam. The SDGs need a global rescue plan, said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his opening remarks to the SDG summit a few weeks ago in New York. By this, the UN Secretary General draws attention to the fact that global crises that currently seem to follow one another in nearly breathtaking speed, including armed conflict, climate impacts, and the still ongoing effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, threaten the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. And during the opening remarks of the SDGs summit, Mayada Adil of Sudan and young leader for the SDGs challenged the heads of states assembled. What have you done to include young people in decision-making space? Her question is more than pertinent against the background that youth make up half of the world's population. And I would like to add a second challenge. What have you done to include faith actors in decision-making space? This question speaks to the fact that about 85% of this planet's population adheres to a faith tradition. This makes faith communities the largest transnational civil society actors. Religion impacts how people think, how they act and don't act. It simply blows my mind, if I may say so, that this powerful force in shaping human action is still being neglected by this world's leaders, including the SDG summit. You might want to guess how many times we find the terms faith or religion mentioned in the political declaration of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. I guess you guessed correctly, 0 times. As if religion didn't exist, as if religion didn't matter for the SDGs, for peace, for justice. Against this, our entire book series and this book claims religion matters. It holds on to the significance of religion for the SDGs. Another premise of this book that almost goes without saying in the context here is the inherent ambivalence of religion. Each religion contains both problematic and constructive features. For instance, each religion can be used to incite hatred and violence, but also contains potent resources for peace and reconciliation. The way this book, and actually the entire series, is set out is to build bridges between different spheres of engagement, to bring together the insights of academics, policymakers, and practitioners. The book therefore wants to be easily accessible. It tries to avoid overly technical language. And with only about 120 pages, it is comparatively short. And it is open access. Olivia kindly sent the ebook around. Maybe you had the chance to already have a look at it. The book is structured into 2 main parts. At first, a shorter part is entitled The Rise of Religion in Development. And I'm very grateful, especially to you, Catherine, for your comments in reading the draft of the book before it was published, and also for endorsing it after publication. So in the first part, I discussed the historical background that first led to acknowledging the impact of religion on development, and then towards a tentative inclusion of faith actors in development, a process that is still ongoing and that still has a lot of room for improvement, to say the least. I want to draw your attention particularly to chapter 3, entitled Meet the Family: Religion's Different Phases in Development. There I introduce a 7-dimensional analytical model of reading religion right in different developmental contexts. This model is simple to use without being simplistic. I will say a few more words on it in a moment. In a second, more extensive part, I chose different SDGs to look at in more detail. For each of them, I applied the 7-dimensional model of analyzing the role of religion in this SDG. I discussed the role of religion in poverty alleviation, in health and education, as well as in gender equality, in the reduction of inequality, climate action, and peace. Since I myself come from a Christian perspective, I made it a point to include contributors who bring in a wealth of wisdom from different faith traditions for each of these chapters. Among the faith traditions represented there are Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and Native American perspectives. I asked these colleagues to focus on a case study that illustrates the role of their faith tradition within the respective SDG. One of the, I hope, many highlights in this book is certainly Azza Karam's contribution on the role of faith in health, providing multi-religious perspectives on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Another feature of this book and the entire series is that each volume ends with a chapter on the practical implications for academics, policymakers, and practitioners. And for those of us who have limited time resources, so for everyone, I guess, each volume starts with an executive summary, giving you all the key findings of the book at a glance. It is through these key findings that I would like to take you now very briefly. And given the fact that you are all experts in this field, some of these findings might not be that shockingly new to you, while others might highlight a facet that is well worth being reminded of. So let me briefly share my screen. Sorry. There we go. Implication 1, going beyond the binary, bridging the religious-secular divide. I'm quoting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. There's now indisputable and solid evidence that religions and religious actors can successfully be invited into and contribute to global development. Thus, there's a clear consensus that religious actors should be recognized and legitimized as important players in achieving the SDGs and other sustainability objectives, unquote. Despite the evidence cited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, the cooperation of faith-based and secular development actors is still operating largely on the fringes of development discourse and practice. While no longer exactly exotic, faith-based and secular partnerships for the SDGs are still far from being mainstreamed. Much more remains to be done on all sides, including the part of academics, policymakers, and practitioners. Religion matters for the SDGs. This must be the premise for development theory and practice. Implication 2, reading religion right, 7 dimensions of religion. The so-called religious factor in development oftentimes remains somewhat vague and difficult to grasp. And there is, to quote an UNFPA report, there remains an ongoing need for shared analytical and definitional clarity when dealing with religion in development processes. For that matter, even for faith-based actors themselves, it can be difficult to explain their unique contributions. This book introduces a 7-dimensional analytical model designed to help academics, policymakers, and practitioners recognize, analyze, and interpret the religious dimensions within a given development context. These 7 dimensions are religion as religioscape, as community, teachings, spirituality, practice, institutions, and frameworks. Depending on each particular situation, some of these dimensions are more prominent than others. In conflict settings, for example, it might be the case that the dimensions of community, teachings, spirituality, and practice play a major role. Being aware of the potentials and the problems connected to these aspects can be helpful when trying to engage faith actors in the quest for peace and reconciliation. Implication 3, creating spaces of trust, the need for encounter between all relevant actors. I'm quoting a SSRC report. Creating forums for interfaith and secular religious debate on international development is an important step in understanding and respecting differences, as well as finding and pursuing shared goals. Azza, I think you have written that. This recommendation, which resulted from a series of consultations on religion, development, and the UN in 2011, has not lost any of its validity nor urgency. We need spaces of trust where all relevant actors in development, including academics, policymakers, and practitioners, both faith-based and secular, can encounter one another, build trust, and share insights. Implication 4, wanted bilinguality, religious and developmental literacy. In order to mitigate the Babylonian confusion of tongues that inevitably arises in international, interdisciplinary, and cross-sectional settings, such as development work, all partners involved need to become bilingual, or rather multilingual. And not only in the sense that bad English is the new Latin. Rather, faith-based actors need to acquire development literacy, such as human rights language, while secular actors need skills in religious literacy in order to learn faith-based actors' language and culture. Just a very brief personal footnote. The other day, I was invited to a journalist school in Munich. They have started a new program in religious journalism. They recognized that, at least in the German-speaking system of education, people are lacking religious literacy, and that becomes a problem when journalists are meant to report and interpret on settings with religious dimensions. So they have created this, I think, excellent initiative of offering this advanced course in religious journalism. Implication 5, theology matters, why we need immanent critics. Learning human rights language is not enough for faith-based actors. Rather, the very idea of universal human rights needs to be made at home in each and every single faith tradition. Otherwise, human rights and the SDGs that arose from this very concept will always be in danger of remaining on the surface only. For the SDGs to become an integral part of everyone's DNA, we need theologians who speak critically and self-critically from within their own faith tradition. These immanent critics who do the crucial work of connecting their own faith tradition with the concerns of human rights and the SDGs need to be more supported. Implication 6, women in focus, rethinking religious leadership. Much work has been done already on the importance of engaging religious leaders for sustainable development, and rightly so. Yet engaging religious leaders oftentimes means engaging older men. This does not only lead to a gender imbalanced representation of religious communities within the field of development, but effectively ignores the wisdom and experiences of the very people who work in all areas of development every single day, women of faith. This leads to two consequences. First, the concept of religious leadership needs to be redefined. And second, the criteria for the engagement of faith-based actors in development need to be adapted to better incorporate the voice of women. 3 more to go. Implication 7, youth in focus. What about social media? The importance of engaging the youth for sustainable development is undisputed, especially against the background that many of the so-called lesser developed countries have a much greater proportion of young people as compared to so-called developed countries. It is therefore all the more surprising that social media, which is one of the most effective tools of reaching the youth, I have 3 teenagers at home and I can testify to that fact, remains underused. Development actors must become more efficient, must become better in utilizing social media for outreach to the youth on matters of faith and development. Implication 8, what good is this? Accountability and measuring impact. The road to coordination between donors, multilaterals, and faith-based actors must include accountability. For instance, by means of clear action plans, including guidelines and timelines. To quote Azza Karam once more, accountability will be key in the move towards action. At the same time, more work needs to be invested in the development of methods and frameworks for evaluation and impact measurements. This is necessary not only for strengthening the projects and initiatives in the field, but also for professional recognition, as well as the communication and engagement with policymakers. Although recent years have seen improvement, much more remains to be done. And my last implication, 9, at least the last one for today, one faith is not enough, the power of multi-faith engagement. I'm quoting Religions for Peace. Ambitious goals and complex problems can best be tackled when different faith communities work together. This holds especially true in the complexities of the field of global development. 2 implications follow. First, collaboration with faith-based actors often means focusing on the 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The insights and wisdom of other faith traditions, such as the indigenous or Dharmic traditions, need to be given much more consideration. And secondly, faith-based actors need to collaborate not only with secular actors, but also with one another, developing multi-religious narratives and engagement on the SDGs. I'd like to conclude with another statement by Religions for Peace. Interreligious work is not optional, but absolutely necessary. With this, I am delighted to hand over to one who decisively shaped Religions for Peace in the past years, Dr. Azza Karam. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Christine. Olivia, is it okay if I jump in? Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks to the Joint Learning Initiative. I was privileged to be at its inception many, many years ago, and I have continued to be extremely impressed by the way that that grouping of partnerships has grown so brilliantly. So thank you for the opportunity to put this together. And I am a personal big fan of Professor Christine. So if you think I'm effusive in what I'm about to say, it's actually nothing compared to what I really think and feel about her and her work. I recall the very first conversation between us, Christine, when you introduced me to this idea of the series. And I fairly almost jumped up and down with joy, because this is precisely the kind of bringing together of knowledge and harvesting of experience that is absolutely critical to this nexus between religions and development. And to see it so stewarded so well by you and your colleagues in a form of this Routledge book series, I think is a gift to anyone who's been in this space. And I'm also very grateful for the way that you have systematically in the series been open to bringing on board the Joint Learning Initiative expertise, which is significant over many years of putting, thanks to Olivia in particular, putting together the knowledge base and systems and comparing and contrasting. And I think building on that, which is absolutely critical, but you've also honored the work of Religions for Peace significantly as you've engaged in this space, so that it hasn't been a knowledge that excludes the other spaces of wisdom, but on the contrary, I think the series, as you have become its leader and co-editor and you've done something that is absolutely necessary in and of itself in this realm, which is to point, recognize, and integrate the knowledge and wisdom that is already there. Because we all know that religions didn't start recently. In fact, they're the oldest thing that anyone is familiar with anywhere in the world. As we also know that the Sustainable Development Goals, or human development as we refer to it, is also one of the oldest things in our human existence. So the fact that religions and sustainable development are actually an integral part of one another and need to be is not news. So therefore, all the more reason to be very deliberate and intentional about looking at that which has been done and that which is and that which has been said and analyzed and worked on. The harvesting of experience remains an incredibly important initiative and endeavor. And it's not only in this space, but I think if you look at contemporary forms of political, social, financial leadership around us, we will notice that there is one common trend to all the not so good leadership, which is that of assuming that you're beginning with something absolutely brand new, never happened before, has never been done. Here is the wisdom, here's the knowledge, here's the tools, never existed before. That assumption and arrogance of expertise is, I think, a huge factor behind why we seem to be repeating atrocities over time. And I'm not referring only to the religious space. I am literally referring to the entire absence in global leadership, moral, religious, political, financial, cultural, you name it. This attitude of let's forget what we've got before, let's only look at this space, let's only look at what we're doing, big time problem for all of us. And I think just to link it up a little bit to some of this, what is unfolding around us, unfortunately, whether we're looking to the north at the atrocities in the Ukraine, whether we're looking to the south at what's happening in between Israel and to the Palestinians and within Palestine, I think in Israel, I think we have to acknowledge a remarkable absence of leadership of any form. So all the more reason, I think, to begin to take very seriously and to reflect on those very valuable implications and very eloquently articulated implications that you raised, Christine, because I think you captured the main to-dos that have to be not only instructive, but actually at the foundation for continuing engagement on this. And to honor the implications that you set out, I just want to raise a few complementary aspects that relate to the how this is being done already and some of the concerns, if you will, with the how. Colleagues who I've had the privilege of working with in this space over the last more than 2 decades, at least the religion and intersection space, know that, of course, there is a unwavering commitment to the engagement on religions, about religions, with religions, in the development foreign policy environment in every single sphere. But there is also a series of lessons that are learned that we need to be alert to as we advocate And as we support and get engaged in this space, we have to be alert to a few important lessons learned. And if you'll bear with me, I will honor your implications by reflecting on some of the lessons learned within each of the rubrics that you mentioned. You rightfully noted the need for going beyond the binary of religious and secular. I think this is absolutely integral. There is right now a little bit too much of an overlap, quite frankly, meaning what? Meaning that the religious in and of itself seems to be happy to be seen as a separate and distinct domain. Religious leaders, religious institutions, some religious NGOs are quite thrilled that now that they have been perceived and seen more and more by the sort of traditional secular institutions of development and foreign policy, they're happy to be seen as a very special place and space, as bringing a very special activism and knowledge and wisdom. Of course, they're happy to be seen as such, and they are such. But I think the challenge here is that the more you see yourself as distinct and special, that also is the beginning of a decline of moral integrity in so many cases. The challenge is not to be grateful for the specialness. The challenge is to actually challenge the specialness and say, no, 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 no. There is much here that could do with improvement. Okay, so the specialness of the special status needs to be something that we would be careful and capable about being a little bit critical of. Yes, because frankly, everyone is special. Every approach is special. Every attitude is special. And any one prioritization of specialdom is a problem in and of itself. So that's just one, if you will, reflection to have. No argument at all. And in fact, full kudos for how you've captured the dimensions of religion. I think they are that and more. I don't think you can actually ever appropriately capture every single dimension of religions. It's impossible because it is everything in our human and planetary existence. If you look at indigenous knowledge, it's all about nature. It's all about how we live and work, and how nature itself grows, develops, honors, or hurts when it is hurt. So there is no way that one can actually capture the entire domains and dimensions of religion. But I think you've done a brilliant job in being able to at least bring them to the level of normal human consciousness, because we are not divine. We are human at the end of the day. Oh, of course, some people believe we're part of the divine and all that. I'd love to see that manifest in policies, but we'll wait for that for a while. The aspect of multi-stakeholderism is absolutely crucial as well. And I think we all need to honor that with another lesson learned in mind, that multi-stakeholderism goes beyond a few sets of partnerships around specific issues. It's great that they're happening. In fact, they're happening quite a plenty. And that's the only qualification to all the implications, is that this work is being done and has been done for some time, this work of engagement, of partnerships, of collaboration, etc. But I think we saw a very important development during the COVID pandemic, which we should never forget, which is that there was a lip service to multi-stakeholderism, to partnerships. There was plenty lip service, but when push came to shove and money was short, the multi-stakeholderism was a bit pathetic, to put it very honestly. I'm sorry, there's probably a much better way of articulating it, but no. None of the religious institutions and NGOs lived up to the multi-stakeholderism on a global scale that the SDGs demand, when it was absolutely needed and necessary. Whether they were secular or religious, the business of the day tended to be competitiveness about the increasingly rare resources, competitiveness about visibility. It wasn't a terribly good job done there about multi-stakeholders. There was a lot of lip service, far less actual commitment and action and joint deliverables. I think the respect that you give, rightly, Christine, to theology and the development of, what are the theologies of collaboration between religions? Because that's a totally different, it's not the same thing as saying, here's the theology of what the theologies inherent in Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, and Buddhism would even say there's no theology as such, but it's one thing to argue for the need for that emerging space of shared theological reflection, jurisprudence. And I think this is precisely what we're missing, is also this idea of theologies of collaboration. And Religions for Peace started with that, which is where we came to meet, you and I, in the context of the series, because of the excitement about the series, because you were actually calling from the very outset for precisely that we needed, what are the theologies of collaboration between different religions? And the assumption that you're going to capture it in one big narrative of here is a theology of multi-religious collaboration is remarkably short-sighted and arrogant, because the whole point is there's no one way of collaborating multi-religiously. There is no one way of collaborating, and is therefore to think to come up with a theology of multi-religious collaboration is to do exactly the same mistakes and harms that have been perpetuated in the name of religion, which is, this is the truth. And the whole point is that we're living in domains and spaces and realities where even the way nature is evolving does not have one truth or one method or one way. So I think one theology of multi-religious collaboration is a bit unrealistic, to put it very politely. And it's about the richness of the narratives of theologies around different forms of collaboration aimed towards different interests. Which then brings to the very, very valuable point you made about the women. Now, Professor Catherine Marshall and I, from a long time ago, have been trying to point to the fact that what happens on women, with women and girls, and about women and girls is actually the litmus test of what? For sustainable development to be assessed as having progressed, you need to look at the status of the most vulnerable. That includes the status of women and girls, but is not limited to the status of women and girls, because it includes also different sectors of society that comes under the gender domain. That gender is one of the most critical litmus tests that is out there. So we can talk about women, but we need to make sure that we've got the gender understanding and in a way, reality very clearly laid out in front of us. Where do all those folks within the religious establishment who are so special, who are so distinct, who have such a rich history of giving and serving and so on, where do they stand in general on issues related to women, yes, and gender equality and gender dimensions? Because it's very, very convenient to cherry pick specific human rights and say, we're doing the best stuff going on that. You hear that so much in the environment and the children's rights space. You hear it less on women, by the way. You don't hear it at all when it comes in any significant platform. You don't hear that, look how amazing we have been in collaborating as different religions together on gender equality. That we hear less. It is there for sure, but it is less prominent in the public discourse. And that is a very critical litmus test. So women, yes, but women and gender in particular, we have to be very sensitive to from now. The idea brings up this continuous dance, and I think it's actually a series of missteps rather than dances around the issue of human rights. That can't be subsumed under any one rubric. I think we began in this space of acknowledging the nexus of religions and development by saying, wither human rights. Because if the collaboration, if the theologies, if the experiences and partnerships that are increasingly emerging, thankfully, between different religious groups, between different religious and so-called secular groups, if that is something to celebrate, it has to be celebrated on the basis of the fact that there is a strengthening of the human rights and civic discourse and realities around the world. It cannot be based on collaboration per se. We cannot celebrate specific collaborations on, say, peace and mediation. That's great. That's wonderful. That's terrific. But where and how this realms of religions intersecting with and serving the cause of human dignity and welfare, how can that be evaluated and accountable per one of the many recommendations that you so wisely made? I think the issue stands, the standard, the measurement of adherence, of legitimacy, of success, or lack thereof has to be the continuum of the human rights agenda. How has these increasing series of collaborations, of activism, of engagement between different religions and secular partners, how is that supporting, strengthening, advancing the full human rights agenda? What is happening today is a travesty. It's about selecting specific human rights. We should have learned over the last 80 years that you don't get little incremental things by certain human rights. When you break up the human rights continuum, which is interdivisible and which is completely necessary as elements of basic reality and coexistence, the minute we start breaking up that, looking at this aspect, looking at that aspect, mobilizing around this aspect, that's when everything starts falling down the drain, is falling down the drain. We are living at a moment today where no leadership, no institution of governance seems to adhere to a moral compass, any moral compass, including the religious institutions themselves. And the lack of the moral compass is because we've lost sight of human rights. That is what I strongly believe. We've lost sight, not of the fact that human rights exist, not of the fact that the human rights is about different things, but we've lost sight of the fact that in order to realize that human rights agenda, all rights matter at all times for all people. It isn't, let's keep this one for the back burner for a second. Let's focus on this one. Let's see how that one can be the most important. Let's see, even those, the same argument is related to those who work on freedom of religion. Those who work on freedom of religion, to them, I say exactly the same thing. You can't prioritize freedom of religion as the one aspect of human rights that needs to be strengthened. And yet look at the range of engagements around religious freedom and look at the amount of resources poured into this space, institutional and human and financial resources. And you realize, wait a minute, what happened to the rest of the human rights work? To what extent are we actually weakening religious freedoms by not having a much more mobilized globally and regionally and nationally movements of human rights? So this is a huge litmus test, the litmus test of any collaboration anywhere, at the level of nation, at the level of regions, and at the level of global. And what we're seeing happen today around us in terms of in every continent there being a war and a conflict of major sorts is because nobody cares about the whole of the human rights agenda. Everyone cares for a little piece of that pie. And you can't have a small piece of the human rights and dignity pie. You can't have a small piece of the human rights and dignity pie, right? That is a feature of reality. That is part, in my humble opinion, of the truth of the divine. So yes, absolutely, women and youth, gender, but the whole of the human rights agenda. And that is the ultimate means of accountability. That is also what we have to hold multi-religious collaboration accountable to. To what extent are these now emerging partnerships into which plenty of resources are being poured in, whether by national governments or whether by specific philanthropists or whether by certain NGOs, to what extent are these multi-stakeholder partnerships and efforts and endless meetings, to what extent are these actually honoring the integrity of the entire human rights agenda in their understanding, conceptualization, reality, and their praxis? And to what extent can we now assess and see over the last 20 years in which this agenda of religion and development has taken off significantly? And you're absolutely right, Christine, to critique that it still doesn't look like the religious actors are taken much into account. I actually think, and that's the only thing that you and I would probably differ on here, I actually think we've done plenty to take religion and development. And if you just start looking at the range of meetings around religions and various development issues around the world, in 2022 alone, there were 50 meetings on, in the English language alone, by the way, that we can know because it was in English. 50 in a space of 12 months is actually quite a lot of meetings on religion. And yet, where are we in 2023? Where are we in terms of any aspect of human rights development, any aspect of civil society advancement, any aspect of governmental accountability? To citizenship, we are actually at if possible, it's an even worse moment in our global geopolitical advancement on so many levels. We're not advancing. We are very, very much at a moment of the peak of the struggle that just seems to be more intense. So unless we start using the moral compass and the real life test of that human rights continuum as a way of assessing to what extent we've come forward, and just keep saying, well, you know, you really should take religion more seriously. Yeah, you should take religions more seriously. You are taking religions plenty seriously, some religions more than others in some countries, so seriously that some other religions are being marginalized in the process. So it isn't just about taking religions more integrally into the development space. It is about using that moral compass, because that's what we started this whole space of arguing for, recognitions of the role of religions. It was about making a difference to the state of affairs of our world. The state of affairs of our world has gone significantly more challenging. We can't continue to repeat the mantra of we've got to do better in religions. We have to then see what we've not done so well and what we are, where we're making mistakes ourselves in this space. And unless and until we become that self-reflective, we will simply be contributing fuel to the fire by just adding yet this other dimension of religion. And so that's my provocative.
Yes, thank you, Azza. Thank you, Azza. So we're now going to go to a period of Q&A. You can either unmute yourself, please put your hand up, and then we'll also have some questions in the chat. Tamara, I see a question in the chat, but you can also please unmute yourself and ask too.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Dr. Karam's human rights agenda, whole human rights agenda, and I'm wondering if to me, the real problem is these extremist views that have now become centered. So it is the whole human rights agenda, but for people that look like me and nobody else. And so how can those of us who sit in more moderate in theologies that actually believe in collaboration and real centering of all the human rights agenda be more aggressive or more vocal, or I don't know what the word is, to decent, like, do we actually need to collaborate across all faith communities? Because maybe some of them don't have a theology that will actually create a real holistic human rights agenda. I don't know. I'm just feeling very angry right now, maybe in my place in the world, in the moderate religious realm, but I feel like this centering of fundamentalism across all kinds of religious spaces, particularly in the US, white Christian nationalism, that kind of thing. How do we actually do collaboration when some people don't actually have a theology that is about human flourishing? It's actually about their flourishing and not even on this planet. They actually think they should destroy this planet so that they can have human flourishing. So how do we collaborate with that?
I'd like to defer to Christine to answer first. This is her book. So if you don't mind, Olivia.
Yes, Christine.
Thanks so much, Tamara. I think this is a real central question, and one that I wrestle myself with. And I actually was speaking from my own very particular perspective, being situated, in Central Europe, Christian context. I find that my own faith tradition still has a problem with human rights. When we look back to its history, it was certainly no love at first sight, human rights and Christianity, right? Human rights developed not because they were supported by the churches or by Christianity, but rather in spite of being not supported or even suppressed. And this is, I think, part of the homework in my own Christian tradition that we have to do to work out, first of all, to deal with our own problematic hermeneutics in the past. I mean, we theologically justified apartheid up to 30 years ago as part of our own Christian theologies. So there's a lot of skeletons in the closet. And we need to work out that human rights is not something alien to the Christian faith or something something external, but it actually links to core concerns of the Christian faith, to compassion, to love, solidarity, justice, peace, truth, name it. And this is something that I still find some Christian theologians feel very skeptical about it, as if human rights was something non-Christian. So there's a lot of homework that we need to do, and that I challenge my own faith tradition, but also every other faith tradition. Otherwise, my fear is that human rights remain just this superficial ideal that sounds great but doesn't take roots. Each faith tradition must find ways to integrate it into its own DNA. Otherwise, it will always remain at the surface, and then the danger is there that as soon as the wind blows, you know, there are no roots, and human rights remain just lip service. So that's the challenge I see for my own faith tradition, but perhaps also for others. But please, Azza, you surely want to supplement?
I think as usual you've covered it. I would just even further nuance by 3 points. The first is that is why if when you look at the sort of, I think it was 10 implications that Christine laid out, it's not one or the other, it's those 10 happening together simultaneously. So you have to look at multi-religious collaboration around all aspects of human rights in all parts of the world, etc. It's about the simultaneity of things happening together. It's not just about taking one of those implications or a couple of them and then looking at them. It's about how those implications need to be and how they are interlinked together. Those who look, to be honest, it's almost a contradiction in terms, Tamara, you're very right to raise it. Those who look at all human rights just for themselves, that's obviously not all human rights, is it? It's either you're going to look at all human rights, which means all humans plus planet, by the way, as integral, or you're not looking at all human rights. You're just talking about all human rights. So you can't be taking into account all human rights for your own community, because then it's not all human rights, right? So that's why the human rights continuum is an absolutely essential aspect of the accountability and the measure of impact and the reality of praxis. It's about whether you are actually taking into account that my enemy is also entitled to human rights. The other is very much the human. And if I don't honor that, I'm not honoring I cannot claim to be honoring all human rights. So that is the fundamental standard. It's not that we are not using the human rights standard. It's that people are claiming that they are when they're not. Fact of life, right? And that gives you grounds to counter and to push back and say, that's not all human rights. I'm sorry. That's the selective rights of some humans, but that is by no means the human rights agenda, right? I think that the point about the moral compass is also a very, very valuable point raised by May. The whole point is we wouldn't have had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as imperfect as it is, okay? We wouldn't have had it if we had not had our faith traditions there already, right? It's about the values common to all belief systems. And that's what enabled us to have a Declaration on Human Rights. Yes, of course, precisely because of its universal validity, it is being actively fought by many groups, as Christine has said. It is being actively fought by many groups. If it hadn't been so universally applicable and therefore very powerful, nobody would have bothered to argue about it or to fight it. It's precisely because of its power that it is fought. And so the point is that this is the moral compass, because it is about that which is common to all of our faith traditions, all of our belief systems. All of them come together in as best form as humans will ever be able to make it, by the way, which is in this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in this Declaration of Human Rights is a morality, is the full elements of our moral compass. And yes, also another point that we don't often take into account when we speak from a religious perspective, some aspects of these rights seem to be contradictory to the other. Freedom of religion and expression versus the fact that we have to live with respect for one another. How valuable is it to champion freedom of religious and expression when it involves burning the holy text that others live by and believe in as very central and integral to their humanity? How valuable, how smart is it? Well, it's smart if you're going to cherry pick one particular human rights and say that is what matters most. Freedom of expression matters more than anything. Yes, but freedom of expression is part of a whole set of freedoms. One does not get realized without the other. So you can't butcher someone else in the name of your freedom of expression, right? And butcher here is I use it specifically because if you can butcher people verbally too. We can hurt each other, do incredible atrocities with our tongue, the way we speak, the words that we use. So I think it's about looking at how the entire human rights agenda, and it's all human rights, being actively the moral compass. The more we honor that, at least, or seek to, that's a moral compass better than if we just look at one or two or three aspects of certain human rights or legislation.
Okay, so we've got a hand up from Dr. Faisal Khan. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And this is, we have 2 minutes left. So this will be the last question. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening from Dhaka. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. I'm honored to join this event, which gathers great scholars of religion and development, like Dr. Azza Karam and Dr. Christine Schliesser. Yes, we are now discussing on religion, which is matters for achieving sustainable development goals at a time when the whole world is under the grip of economic uncertainty due to the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the recent escalation in Israel-Palestinian conflict. So my question to today's speaker, Ms. Christine, how the implications he has presented in just share with us, like implication can positively contribute or address to end war and bring peace, to lessen economic uncertainty in the years to come. Thanks very much for giving me this opportunity to ask this question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Khan, for this question to be answered in, I think, 30 seconds that we have left.
Take your time, Christine. Yeah, you can answer.
Well, I would actually like to call upon the wisdom that is gathered here together. Of course, I think the nexus between economics and conflict, that's a very crucial one. And what role can religion play in this? Well, I just came back from Rwanda, actually, and there you had 30 years ago the genocide against the Tutsi and the moderate Hutu, and I met with a friend of mine who initiated a well, we could say FBO called CARSA, Christian Action for Reconciliation and Social Assistance. And he himself, he's a survivor of the genocide and decided to become an advocate for peace and reconciliation on religious grounds. His own background is Christian. And there I find a very powerful example where I would think the impossible is actually taking place, where reconciliation and healing takes place after a genocide. And this is, I think, one of the special contribution of us as faith actors, that we hold open the space for the impossible to actually occur.
Thank you, Christine. So as usual, we probably all want to get into about a 3-hour debate on this, but we're all moving on to other things. I know we only scheduled this for an hour, so I understand that people have to go. I would say that these are the kind of debates that we do get into in this reading group, maybe on some other small aspects of these debates. We've obviously taken on a huge topic today of the whole of the significance of religion for the SDGs. So I encourage you to come to future events and keep engaging with each other on this. And the recording will be available online in the next day or two. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Christine. Thank you very much, Azza. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Goodbye for now.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Christine and Olivia. Thank you very much.
Bye.